Hello everyone, it's me Uncle John. Today I am going to read S5 5083, Chapter 3 and 5, 3 to 5. In chains again, back on the Amistad, Getney and Meade from the U.S. ship Washington were asking some questions. Where's the captain? The African didn't seem to understand. It was even stranger when Getney and Meade found Luis and Montes wearing chains. They fell to their knees at Getney's feet. Speaking in Spanish, Getney couldn't speak Spanish, but when he saw the change in the bottom of the ship, he understood everything and he was very pleased. This was a slave ship, carrying these Africans as slaves. If the slaves are mine now, he thought, I can sell them in America and get a lot of money. Sail to Connecticut, Getney ordered. An American court can decide what happens next. Chained together, the Africans left the ship and walked into the town. People in the town looked at them in surprise. They clearly thought that the Africans were from another world. There was Fala with his strange pointed teeth and Yamba so much taller than them. They think we are murderers or animals, thought Sink, but he tried to hold his head. I had to look straight back at them. The guards threw the 39 men into one prison and took the young girls to another. In prison, he began to think about the 10 Africans who were already dead, either in fighting or from illness. What was it all for? And in the darkness, when no one could see him, Think dropped his head and hid his face in his hand. Chapter 4, Friendly Face. The President of the U.S., the Martin Van Buren, smiled and waved to the crowd in the small town that he was passing through. The crowd was shouting, "The Van Buren for President, Van Buren for President." The Van Buren wanted very much to become president again. He was enjoying this welcome. So when his secretary, Leather Hammond, shouted the news about the Amistad in his ear, he really wasn't interested. Senor Calderon, an important man from Spain, sat next to the president on the train back to Washington. Calderon was trying to explain the problems of the Amistad to the president. The Amistad is a Cuban ship. It was carrying the slaves from the capital, Havana, to another town. Oh yes, said the president. The slaves killed almost everyone, Calderon said. Only 2 Cubans called Luis and Montes are still alive. Really? The president replied. These 2 men bought the slaves in Havana, so the slaves are their property, and since Cuba belongs to Spain, they are Spain's property. The Queen of Spain wants you to return the slaves at once. When Senor Calderon left, the president said to his secretary, "Hey man, I'm trying to have a drink after a very long day. There are perhaps 30 million black people in this country. Why do I have to think about these 39? If there is a problem, you find the answer to it." Everyone knew the news about the Amistad and the slaves. Now, in American prison, it was on the front page of some of the newspaper. Murder at sea. One of the people reading the newspaper story was Theodore Judson. He remembered the time in the past when he was a slave. Judson was a free man now, with a good job at the university, but he was one of the lucky ones. Most black people in America were still slaves. When Judson read the news, he knew that the newspaper was telling only one side of the story. He knew that the slaves from the Amistad needed help. He hurried to see his friend, Louis Tappan. Tappan was a rich white man, but like Judson, he wanted slavery to end. He could help because he had a newspaper business. These men are probably slaves from the West Indies, don't you think? Asked Tappan. No, I don't. I've seen some of them. They look African. They don't look like slaves. I think they were free men until a short time ago, but the courts will say that they are murderers. Then we must try to tell this side of the story, replied Tappan. When Judson next So one of Tappan's newspaper, the Hampe, told a very different story. The fight to be free at sea. Chapter 5, in the courtroom. The Africans walked to the courtroom and changed. In the courtroom, The African, still in chains, felt strange and uncomfortable. Justin was a free man, but he was one of the lucky ones. The Africans walked to the courtroom in chains. Court was full. People wanted to see the murderers. Most of the crowd were white, but there were one or two black faces. Judge Justin came into the room and sat down. Immediately, the U.S. lawyer, William Hollaber, began to speak against the African. But as soon as he began, Louis Tappan stood up among the crowd, waving some papers before the judge. Sir, I and many others would like to speak for these men. At the moment, they have no one to speak for them. They cannot speak for themselves. Mr. Tappan tried to remember that you're not a lawyer, began Hollaber with an unpleasant smile. But again, he did not finish his sentence. The policeman with two important-looking men pushed through the crowd. The first man was Senor Caldero from Spain. The second was John Forsyth, U.S. government secretary. Now, nobody knew what was happening. The slaves, said the Secretary Forsyth, belong to Spain, and we must return them to Spain immediately. Those slaves belong to me. And my friend here, said another voice. Everyone looked round to see who was speaking. Oh, we, Thomas Gutney and Richard Meade, saved the Spanish ship Amistad and everything she was carrying. That means the slaves too. Secretary Forsyth laughed loudly. Do you think you are more important than the Queen of Spain? Judge Justin asked. There were a few laughs from the crowd. The judge told them to be silent. Are there any other people that I need to hear from? He continued. Another voice answered. The slaves really belong to these two men here. Was another lawyer speaking for Louis and Montes. Judge Justin looked down into the room full of people. How, he thought, has this case become so difficult? It was almost funny. A young man standing at the back of the court thought it was very funny. He was the lawyer too, Roger Baldwin, and he thought he knew the answer to the problem. Outside the court, Baldwin went up to Louis Tappan and told him his name and job. You're a property lawyer, said Tappan, looking at the young man's cheap clothes and untidy hair. Yeah, if people cannot agree about property and who it belongs to, they need me. I'd like to help you. Tappan and Justin didn't seem to understand. Clearly, explained Baldwin, the problem of the slaves is the problem of who they belong to. Everyone thinks, rightly or wrongly, that the slaves belong to them. I'm sorry, but what we need is a criminal lawyer for these men, not a property lawyer for slaves, Tappan said. Baldwin shook his head. You're wrong. You will see. He turned round and walked away. Chapter 6. People are not property. John Quincy Adams was once the 6th president of the United States. Now, he was 72 years old, but he was still an important man in the government. He was also a lawyer and a very good speaker. Most days, he just felt dull. His hands shook enough and he didn't remember anything. Tappan and Justin went to meet Adam in Washington. Adams took Tappan's hand, but he couldn't remember why they wanted to see him. Something about slaves on a ship, some trouble, the courts. This is a very important case, the man called the Tappan was saying. The Queen of Spain said that the African belonged to her. The president agrees with her, and there are others. Adam suddenly said, do you really think that the president is interested in the Queen of Spain or what she wants? I've been president, and I know he's only thinking about one thing at this time of year, how he can become president again. Adams turned away. And I'm sorry, but I'm neither a friend nor an enemy of slavery. I won't help you. Justin now decided to speak. Sir, I know a bit about you, he said. I have studied what you did as president, and your father too. Adam looked round in surprise. But there is one job for you to do. Joe continued. There must be an end to slavery. And the fact is that you're against slavery. You belong with us. Adam didn't get angry. You're very clever, aren't you, Mr. Justin? Adam said quietly, but I'll tell you something now. Being clever is useless if you're not polite. Get another man to help you. Justin and Tappan needed a lawyer with a name that was famous in America. Adams was the perfect man, but he was only the first who said no. They asked an important lawyer to take the case. None of them wanted to do it. Baldwin was the only hope. While they were having dinner with Baldwin, Justin spoke about the firm. If the courts give the men back to Spain, they'll return as a slave to Cuba. The Cubans will say that the men are murderers and must die. If the courts give the man to the American, they get me admit, the two will probably sell them back to Spain, and the man will die. Mr. Justin, it's much easier than you think. It's the same as land, houses, and animal. If you know who they belong to, you have almost won. Animals? Now, in the U.S., Baldwin, the law says that you can only buy or sell slaves if they are born slaves. Is that true? Justin agrees. So, were they born slaves? Baldwin asked. We don't think so. We think they were freemen in Africa until a few weeks ago. If these men are not Cuban slaves or anybody's slaves, if kidnappers took them straight from Africa, then the kidnappers are the criminal, and the people who bought them are also criminal. We can forget murder and all the rest, and we have won. When Baldwin left, Justin looked across in Japan. You know, it's possible that he's right, but he didn't feel very sure in a U.S. court. Nothing could be as easy as that. Chapter 7. Africans or Cubans. The Africans were back in court again. This time Baldwin's eyes rested mostly on Sink. He was the one who killed the Amistad's captain, but his face was brave and his eyes were intelligent. Perhaps he's a killer, Baldwin thought, but he looks like a prince. Hollaber, the U.S. lawyer, stood in front of the jury. He waved the knife that the Africans used on the Amistad. I cannot begin to describe what these slaves did, he was saying, how bloody. Hollaber's words were strong, but Baldwin knew that this was only half the story. It was his job to tell the African story, and it was a very difficult job because the Africans spoke no English. Baldwin understood not one word of their language. When Hollaber finished, Baldwin stood up. Untidy as always, looking at the judge and jury over his gold glasses, Baldwin began. This case isn't about murder. It's about knowing the difference between one country and another. Baldwin crossed to stand in front of Fala. Open your mouth, he ordered. Fala looked back at the lawyer, not understanding, repeated the order in Spanish again. Fala did nothing. You see, he doesn't understand, said Baldwin. Stand up, he said to another African again in English and Spanish. None of the Africans moved. What's your name? Baldwin asked another. No answer. Sir, Baldwin said to the judge, these men understand neither English nor Spanish. That's because they are Africans. They do not belong to the Queen of Spain. You have no proof, Oliver said loudly. And I have a bill here, said Louis' lawyer. It shows that Mr. Luis bought these slaves in Havana. It lists their Cuban name. They are black Cubans born as a slave. Show me a Cuban with teeth like this. Baldwin put his hand on Fala's mouth, pulled it open. Every eye in their room was on Fala's pointed teeth. Yes, Mr. Baldwin, but do you have any paper, any proof? Sir, I have them. These men are my proof. Judge Jason looked at the African with dislike. I thought you spoke quite well, Jason told Baldwin outside the court. Thank you, but he wasn't sure. He needed proof. Without proof, how could he win the case? He heard the sound of chain, turned round. Prisoners were coming out of the court. Baldwin watched them as they came closer. As they passed, the Saint gave him a long, hard look and said, Nigga. Baldwin couldn't understand the word, but it was clear that Sink wanted to say something to him. The African prisoners moved on. Baldwin watched them as they disappeared down the street towards the prison. Later that evening, Baldwin went to see Sink. The guards they brought Sink to him in chain. Baldwin held out his hand. Sink took Baldwin's hand and pulled it towards his heart. He felt sure that Baldwin was trying to help him. I need to have proof that you are from Africa, Baldwin said in English. You want to show them that we are from Africa, Sink said in his language. How can you tell me? Baldwin said. Then he sat down and made a shape with his finger in the dirt on the ground. This is my home here, he said. Sink looked. He understood. This is Cuba. Baldwin continued. He made a smaller shape of water, made the shape of Africa, half a meter away from the small shape. Is this your home? Is it? In the light of the moon, long way from Baldwin and Shea. Here, far away, my home. Sink smiled back. At last someone understood. Chapter 8, Proof. Jason could not stand up straight. The ceiling was very low. Only light came from his lamp, but he could see the hand. The neck chains lying on the floor of the Amistad. Justin and Baldwin were looking for something, anything in fact. There was proof of where the Africans came from, and there was something dark there. He touched it. It was dry blood. Justin closed his eye. He thought about his mother and father and the journey long ago on a ship like this one. Suddenly, there was a loud noise and a shout. Justin dropped the lamp, and the place became black. It's only me. Out of the darkness, I fell down some stair. I haven't found anything yet. Have you? No light? No, light the lamp. Justin said he wanted to go. As Baldwin lit it, he saw something in the corner. It was a leather bag. Inside there was some paper. They were all black in cord. Baldwin was speaking proudly, holding some old papers in front of the jury. These papers have a list of Spanish names on them. It tells us that these are the names of the prisoners here. We found these papers in the Amistad, but they do not belong to the Amistad. Look at the names of the ship on this paper. They come from a Portuguese ship, the Tecora. We have all heard of the Tecora. It's a slave ship that sails between Africa and Cuba. Mother, Montes and Luis looked suddenly worried and angry. Judge Justin gave a long, hard look at Hollabird. Baldwin put the papers in front of the judge. These men and women are not slaves. They are not anyone's property, and they never have been. Who kidnapped them from their homes in Africa? We don't know that yet, but we know that they are brave men and they fought their kidnapper. So why are they sitting before you, still in chains? Surely it is clear that they must go free. Chapter 9, a new judge. In the president's office, John Forsyth was explaining the problem of the African to the president. There are two ways that this can end. Either the Africans will die as murderers, or they will go free. Neither of these are good for us. If they die, you get a lot of trouble from the people who want to end slavery. But if they go free, you'll get even more trouble from the South, the people who want slavery to continue. They'll be angry if the Africans go free, and you'll never become president again. Because of this? Buren asked impressed surprise. It's even worse than you think. If these Africans go free, every black slave in the country will want to be free. Even war is possible. The president didn't lie what he was hearing, but it was true. The newspapers were full of the story of the Amistad. Small towns, big cities in the south and the north. People felt very strongly about it. The problem of slavery was more important now than ever before. But there is only one hope. Judge Justin wants the slaves to go free, but looked up. Hopefully we can get another judge. Baldwin was in his office when he got the news. He was so angry that he threw his lamp against a wall. His men have got what they want, he told Justin. Judge Justin will not decide the Africans' case now. It'll be Judge de Coughlin, chosen by Secretary Forsyth. Coughlin will say what the president wants him to say. They needed Adams' help. Justin traveled through the night to see him again. He asked Adams, as politely as possible this time, to tell them what to do. Again, Adams didn't seem to be interested, but finally he said, when I was a young lawyer, I realized that in a court, you have to tell a good story. If you tell the best story, you win. Justin was not sure what the old man meant. Adam continued, what is the African story? You and Baldwin have shown what they are African. But you don't know who they are. If you can find out something about them, then their story will become more interesting. Adams turned away. One thing was clear. Those were the last words that he wanted to say about the Amistad. The end.